Welcome to the 1960s, a modern time of war, movements, and mind-lifting at the United States military headquarters. The 1950s was a simple yet interesting time for America, which included events such as communism, war, and Coca-Cola. Did I mention communism and war? Well, those topics came along for the ride when the 1960s entered the picture, just like how America entered the Vietnam War. Let's take a look at the major wars America has been involved in. The American Revolution against the British, War of 1812 against the British, Civil War against ourselves, World War I against one part of the Europeans, World War II against another part of the Europeans and a little bit of Asia, and the Korean War against communism. And that brings us here to the Vietnam War. America had very little participation in the war, but as the war went on and tensions between the Soviet Union and America rose, so did America's ambition to join the war. So before America set off to Vietnam, there were events leading up to that decision. The first would be a nuclear threat. In 1945, America forced Japan to surrender by dropping 2 atomic bombs, one in Hiroshima and the second in Nagasaki. After the war ended, the Soviet Union realized what power America had and was worried about falling behind, so in an act that many say would be the start of the Cold War, the Soviet Union began to test an atomic bomb of its own. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb. America had now realized it was no longer alone. America's nuclear monopoly had fallen. This was not good for them. 1 year later, the Korean War began, and America, a part of the United Nations, fought alongside the South Koreans to prevent a communist takeover in Korea. That war ended in a stalemate 3 years later. During this time, the fear of communism in America was on a rise and quickly overtook American life. In 1952, the British developed its own atomic bomb, and because England was not really an ally of the Soviet Union anymore, it posed a threat to them, so they began trying to find other ways to one-up their enemies. This would include creating more atomic bombs, spreading the influence of communism, and most worrisome for the Americans, targeting support nearby the United States. The Soviet Union turned to nearby islands in the Gulf by America for support for where they found a common ally with Cuba. The Castro brothers had formed an underground movement in the early 1950s to try and overthrow the corrupt regime of dictator Fulgencio Batista, whose basically under the rule Cuba had become a haven for organized crime while general population was brutalized. Fidel Castro turned the country communist, giving the Soviet Union a common ally to one-up America. When America found out about the new alliance building in the Gulf of just miles from Florida, American President John F. Kennedy decided it was time to take action. America had planned an invasion of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba to try and overthrow the new communist government that Cuba had taken on, and basically kick Soviet Union out of the Gulf of Mexico. America prepared for weeks, getting its soldiers ready to invade Cuba, but when the time came to invade, Kennedy had scaled back the invasion size by a lot, which proved to be a huge mistake in America's corner. When American troops arrived, Cuban soldiers were there to meet them. This uncovered Castro's Cuban Revolution. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a huge failure for America in that they were underestimated the Cubans' knowledge and strength. Now, the Bay of Pigs would not be the only problem that the Soviet Union and America had that involved Cuba. The next event, known today, is the closest the world has ever gotten to nuclear warfare. It was 1962 when tensions between the Soviet Union and America were rising fast. After the failed American invasion of Bay of Pigs, Cuba continued to ally with the Soviets. During the 1960s, the Soviets had been shipping missiles and nuclear weapons to Cuba because the Soviet Union missile range did not allow them to reach America. But when they put them in Cuba, yes. And because they had that allyship with Cuba, Cuba basically said, you can put your missiles here, because they reach America, and we are friends, so yada yada yada. So basically that's what happened. Soviets began to ship them out to Cuba, and America didn't notice what was happening until a U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba and took photos of a soccer field. They didn't find no soccer balls on the soccer field, instead they found missiles. Nuclear missiles, Soviet missiles. America moved to level 2 as it was now in full notice of Cuba and the Soviets' plan. If America moved to level 1, it would mean war. America wanted to avoid war, so instead they placed a blockade around Cuba and basically told the Soviet Union, if any Soviet ships cross this line, we shoot you down. The Soviet Union started turning the ships around and were keeping them far enough distance from the blockade, but still refused to remove the missiles already there. Tensions began to rise fast, and the day before the war broke out, Soviet Union dictator Nikita Khrushchev basically came up with a compromise. America, you take your missiles out of Turkey and we take ours out of Cuba. America agreed, and the world took a huge breath of relief. They were like, oh yes, you worked something out. But, this one act of agreement didn't mean it was the end of the Cold War, because after this event, tensions still rang out between the two countries. The tension took form of Germany. You remember Germany? The country that can't win a world war? The saying, third time's a charm? Well, yeah, no, that doesn't work for Germany. So while France was partying it up in Vietnam, and America and the Soviet Union had enough tension between the two of them to start a drama channel, Germany had been having pretty much fun time too. Like the fact that Germany is now Germanese, because they are now two, and Berlin has also now been split into two. Okay, so at the end of World War II, the Allies split up Germany because the treaty was just too dangerous, because Germany can figure out how to overthrow one of those. So the best solution was to Germany's power was actually division. America, Britain, and France, and the Soviet Union, each took one part of Germany. America, France, and Britain then merged those together to make West Germany with a republic government. And then they left the Soviet Union to be in control of East Germany with none other than a communist government. Wow, shocker, I know. Anyway, so with Germany not being split into two and controlled by other countries, there was no way that Germany would ever be at the center of a government conflict ever again. Well, until America and the Soviet Union made it the center of a government conflict again. Berlin was also split into West and East, and the Soviet Union did not like the fact that East Germans could freely walk into West Germany, and because the Soviets didn't want the East Germans to see how much shittier communism was to literally any other form of government, they decided to build a wall. No, not that wall. There she is. So basically, East Germany became the typical communist country, and that is the embodiment of the "did you read the terms and conditions" checkbox, or the "you get what you paid for" statement. Anyway you put it, West Germany was leaps ahead of East Germany. And because you can't have tension during this time, America and the Soviet Union caused problems, like when the Soviet Union tried to starve West Berlin, so America had to fly food in, the Berlin Airlift, or the time that the Soviet Union and America had lined up tanks at the border of Berlin and threatened to destroy the city, but instead decided to play a game of let's slowly back away from the border until we are far enough away to leave. As you can see, why we call it the Cold War, because the Soviet Union and the United States showed animosity towards each other. But nothing caused tension between the two countries more than the fight for governmental influence. This is where Vietnam came into play within America's game. The Soviet Union's plan with the Vietnam War was to create a domino effect, where if one country would follow communism, then the countries around it would follow as well. The Soviet Union wished for a huge communist takeover, which would cause problems for America's republic government. John F. Kennedy was never a huge, he didn't really like the idea of sending mass amounts of troops to Vietnam because he felt like it wouldn't affect America and there was no direct attack on us. But on November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy, the 30th President of the United States, was assassinated during a presidential motorcade in Texas. Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn into office on Air Force One that day, and he would be the president that pushed America into the Vietnam War. In order to get soldiers ready for the war, Lyndon used the draft. The draft was a process where young men would be picked at random to serve the military and be sent to Vietnam if they fit the criteria. The draft is a part of the selective services where today all boys turning 18 must register for. Repeat, this is not the draft, but it can become the draft if needed. There were draft lotteries that were televised. Draft cards were sent out to the men who picked to go. There was a way around the draft other than not being physically able to go, was college. Most of the time, boys in college were not drafted. America began to arrive in Vietnam in huge numbers starting March 8th, 1965, and would stay in the war until 1973. Vietnam was unlike a war America has ever seen. It wasn't the fields of colonial America, and it was not the trenches of World War I. Nowhere near the experience of the beaches of World War II, far different from Korea. Vietnam was a country shrouded in a thick jungle and villages filled with villagers. The thick and moist atmosphere of the jungle proved difficult for American soldiers to navigate. It was unfamiliar territory, and the enemy had trapped the jungles which the Americans did not know about, and they didn't know where. The sky, deemed useful for America, Operation Rolling Thunder, helped slow down the northern enemy, but on the ground it was not easy. The Vietnamese citizens took a huge hit during the war because it was hard to tell who the enemy was apart from the Allies. By the end of the war, roughly 2.2 million Americans were drafted to Vietnam, a massive number, which many did not make it home. Men were saying goodbye to their families, unknowingly walked into a war that they had no idea if they would come home. This wasn't World War I or World War II, but they had the experience in fighting in fields, woods, and water. This would begin a new age of war, where citizens turned against the country, the war back home. You see what happens in America when you keep joining all these wars? it always seems to come back and to bite you in the ass.